Hey everybody, this is Papa Todd Takes. I'm Papa Todd, and let's talk a little bit more about workplace safety here. And today I want to talk about so you want to be a safety professional, all right? So let's say you're somebody out there, and I hope somebody that picks this up who's maybe considerate and just takes my 2 cents. Think about what it's worth. Um, but so let's say you're working in a factory, working somewhere, and there's a safety opening, maybe a safety specialist, safety technician, whatever the role may be, and you've been participating in the safety committee or whatever. It doesn't take that as a requirement, but it helps, right? It shows you're engaged with safety. So usually it's people that participate a little bit with the safety that put in for these things. What are the qualifications? What do I need, right? So it all depends on your company what the qualifications are going to be. Myself, I like pulling people from the shop floor to come in and begin at those lower roles and build them up. I've actually had a couple of them, three, were former shop floor employees and worked their way into safety manager roles, and they're doing quite well today, and I'm pretty proud of them. Um, so there's a way to get into that and move yourself up. So you got to be willing to take some barbs, and it's a tough learning curve. It's not as simple as, so if you're there and you want to get a position of authority, and that's all you're in it for, is that position of authority. It's not the right role. Um, because you can throw your weight around and get yourself in a lot of trouble in the safety role by doing that. There's really a servant leadership aspect to it, where you have to be willing um, to step up for people, and sometimes that means disciplining them, right? And sometimes that means towing the company line and understanding that there's a reason for why we're doing things. And it can be frustrating at times. Even the best intentioned companies, sometimes you kind of scratch your head, why are we doing it this way? But you have to start weighing things. So there's a few things I'll go through first, like some of the qualities I think it would take in a person, my feelings, what it takes to be a good safety person. One, you got to have thick skin. I'll just tell you right now, you are never going to be anybody's favorite person in the plant. Because you are seen as the cops, you're seen as the fuzz, right? So you're the one that's got to lay down some rules and force some. And there's going to be times, especially if you work for a bigger corporation, that they're going to come out and they're going to push out some rules that you have to enforce. That is your role. You were hired to do this. Even if you don't 100% agree with them, there comes a time where you have to you have to draw the line and say, this is what I was hired for. This is what they expect. We have different opinions, but this is what they expect out of this role. And so you're going to have to enforce sometimes rules that you don't necessarily agree with. And there was times, like I can talk during COVID. I'm not going to talk any specific rules, but there was all sorts of rules that came out. And there was never, I very seldom was everybody in the safety community in lockstep with how we approach certain issues. But once your company made a decision, you better stick with it and you better push it. And so you got to be willing to do that. And part of that has to be, you have to be willing to listen and understand the reasons why. Once you can start understanding why they're doing this, you don't necessarily have to agree with it, but if you can understand why, it makes it a lot easier to enforce rules sometimes you don't even personally agree with. You have to be a stand-up person. You have to be willing sometimes to stop a production line because something's just maybe perhaps so hazardous, or somebody's doing something that's so dangerous. You got to stop them, and you might stop a whole line. You might have to shut down an overhead crane. That's the only overhead crane in an apartment because of an issue with it. And you better be willing to stand up for that decision once you've made it. And so you don't do it on a whim. You go and you investigate, and you can temporarily shut something down, but then you got to figure out what is going on. Is this something, does it need to be shut down? Are there other measures we can take? And so you can't always be 100%. Like, well, the best thing would be for a brand new crane here. Well, is that needed here? Or is there alternative means that we can do this? Can we do a dual lift, or can we move this by other means? Maybe a forklift will do the movement instead until we get something done on that crane, whatever it may be. I can't come up with a specific instance of what it may be. Sometimes it's because there was a shock load on an overhead crane, and then you have to shut that down, and it's got to be inspected by somebody, a crane expert that can come in and re-inspect and make sure it's safe to use. Well, your operations, a lot of times they're saying, hey, we need to go, I can't shut this crane down. It shuts the line down. Well, it says that once it's experienced a shock load, you got to shut her down until it can be properly inspected, right? So you got to be willing to stand up for that, and that's not always easy to do. And sometimes you have to stand up to the employees, right? So let's say you have a case where you're trending and there's head bumps and people are bumping their head all over the place. So you mandate hard hats. It's just the risk is there. It's been shown. OSHA's 5A1, recognize safety hazards. Well, I've had 3 OSHA recordable injuries in the last 2 months with somebody bumping their head and cracking it wide open because we work around this stuff all day long. Well, guess what? You need to wear PPE, and they're going to push back. Believe me, even if you can show them the hard numbers, you start adding PPE to the workforce. They never like it. And I understand it. I was in the workforce, right? And so I hated it too. But you got to get over that learning curve. Once they get used to it, it'll settle down. There'll still be some that'll harbor some resentment towards you. But so you got to be willing to stand up. And sometimes that means standing up to the company. Sometimes that means standing up to the employees. And sometimes if you're being inspected by a third party and they come in and they're pushing a little too hard, or you think they're in the wrong and you're having to stand up for your company, you have to be willing to stand up there. Now there's a different means each way on how you handle that. But you have to be willing to stand up. So you got to be a stand-up person. You have to be, again, a caretaker. You have to be a servant leader. Your number one thing in that plant, and this should never change, is that your number one thing is the safety of the people in your care, because they really are in your care. You have been given control or a high-ranking role within that department to see to it that the workforce stays safe, that we keep them safe, that we're giving them what they need. So you have to go into it with that mindset every day. And sometimes that's hard to do because sometimes they'll frustrate you. But you have to be willing to do that. So, and that's where I talk about in another video I did about who are you looking for as a safety role. And you'll see those individuals rise. Those individuals, if you're going to end up getting somebody off the shop floor, like you guys that are thinking about considering a safety career, do they really care about the people, right? Do they care, or is this just, hey, they see this as a easy job they can get a roll out, and they won't last long in safety if they're getting into it because they want a job that they're not busy on. I've never seen anybody in safety that isn't, at least nobody worth their salt, that isn't busy all the time. So there's that. And then you have to have somebody who's willing to understand they're coming in not knowing much. There is a lot to the OSHA code. There is a lot of interpretation that has to happen. People that get into environmental, for instance, there is a very set, this is black and white, this is the way it is. That is not the way the OSHA code is written. Everybody thinks it is. Then once you start getting in there, OSHA says this has to be done, but they don't tell you how you have to do it. And there's always some playroom in there they give you on how you operate and how you do it. So that's good in one aspect. Other aspects, sometimes it'd just be easy if they said you need A, B, and C. They give you points, but they don't wrap it all up in a pretty bundle. And so there's an interpretation there that has to happen. And so you have to be able to understand the intent of the regulatory themes. And so I've held this up before. This is my little Cliff Notes versions from several years back when I took OSHA training class, and folks, this is the OSHA code, and this is just 1910-26. Okay, and see that fine print? That's the book, right? So it's, I don't know, 800 pages long, 800 pages, and this is just the black and white. This does not go through all the rules and all the discussion about when the law was enacted in the first place, and then it doesn't talk about the interpretations and all this kind of stuff that are out there. That, as a safety professional, you got to learn how to go in and look so you can determine, well, how is this one interpreted? Because you can write a letter to OSHA saying, hey, I don't understand this rule, does this work? And if you give them a specific scenario, they'll respond. Now, a lot of times it takes months and months before you ever see it. And then they come out, and it's usually pretty generic when they give it, but at least it clarifies some stuff for you. So you have to be a student, you have to be a researcher, and you have to be willing to do it. I've been doing safety 18, 19 years now, And I am still learning. And if you ever meet a safety person that tells you they know everything about safety, I would take second guess. Either that or hire that individual as soon as you possibly can, because I've never met anybody that does. Now, there are people that have made their way through and earned their way through, right? That know a lot of stuff about most. But man, they're still calling on OSHA, and OSHA is not giving them an answer right away. It's taking time to do there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. So you really need to understand that. You're going to spend a lot of time reading code and a lot of time doing some online classes and research and stuff in your own time, just trying to learn. And then every day you're going to be exposed to several things at work. It's like, what about this? What about this machine guarding? What was it about working surfaces? What do I have to do with the fire extinguishers? What are the 7 steps of lockout, tagout? Exactly what is a confined space? All this kind of stuff. And so you have to be willing to go in and read and look it up, and be able to do that. So you're going to spend a lot of time learning that the rest of your career. You really are. And then you also have to be you have to be willing to develop into being a good speaker, and you have to have some writing skills, because you are going to have to, a lot of times, as many times if you have an OSHA investigation, you have to respond to OSHA, respond to the EPA if you happen to be in environmental health and safety like I am. Where you're going to respond, and you're going to have legal involved, and there's going to be bouncing back. Now, they're not going to write the whole thing for you, though. You're expected as a safety leader to write this, research it, back it up with your opinion, and this is where, some training, and this is where some formalized training really helps. If you don't have somebody like a manager that can really mentor you and teach you and have you write some of them with them and show you how to do this. But you have to have that. So you have to be borderline attorney sometimes in how you respond to things, and making sure you're saying things the way the company wants you to say them, a way that you're not putting your foot in your mouth when it comes to legal matters because you phrase something wrong, and now you spend the next 6 months arguing back and forth, trying to argue why you used that word, and that was fishy to them or whatever. So you have to be able to be humble too. You have to understand you don't know it all. Again, I referenced it a few minutes ago. Not every safety person knows everything. They just don't, right? And so you have to be willing to understand you don't know it all. You have to be willing to understand the people that are out there on the line doing the job, they know that role, that specific job, a hell of a lot better than you likely do. So you got to be willing to go out there and get their input, or at least hear what are they saying, and ask the questions so you understand it, because they're the real experts in it. And so you have to understand that you don't know it all, and you have to be willing to go in and take that and listen to what they're saying. That's a big one, right? And so then the other thing about, if you're going to get into safety, is you have to be willing to do some public speaking, because you're going to be doing a lot of it, right? You're going to have to be willing to train people. And this goes back to knowing the code and understanding things, and be willing not to go in there. I'm sorry, I don't know if you guys heard that, but the wife just really went off on our cat. So I'm guessing we had some supper sitting out on the dinner table, and the cat got into it. But sorry, my wife never curses, and she just cussed. So, but anyway, so to understand that, and so if you're training people and somebody comes up with a question and you don't know the answer, you're really not sure. You can give them an answer, but if you're not sure, not tell them, I'm not 100% sure, this is what my gut tells me, but let me get back to you, because your role as a safety professional, if you don't know the answer, and there's going to be plenty of these times where you need to be able to go and research that answer and come back and let them know. And this is a mistake that a lot of safety people don't. They bluff it off. Okay, I got through that training class. I don't have time. I'll get back to them someday. And you never get back. And then they lose faith in you because you never came back and answered them. And so nobody's 100% perfect on that, or at least nobody I've met. I know I'm not, but I try to be. I try to get back with people, and that's important. So in that public speaking, again, you have to be comfortable. It's one of the biggest fears. One of the top 2 or 3 fears is public speaking, but you'll be up in front of groups of people, and a lot of times you're going to be talking about subjects that they may know more than you about. But it's your responsibility to study up on it. So at least from the safety aspect of it, from the points that are the law, you can walk through the code line by line. This is what's expected, so this is what we should be doing. And if you don't have those answers, again, you just tell them, let me get back to you on that. I want to make sure. And so don't lose their faith. The first time you make something up and you're wrong, man, they're going to hold it against you. And it's hard to get that back sometimes. And again, I talked about being willing to stand up, take the heat from above if you have to shut the line down or make a stance. And then you have to be willing, and I talked about this, the letters, but then you're going to be the one subject to when OSHA or the EPA or a state agency shows up at your door, surprise announcement, or they're doing an investigation because maybe unfortunately you had a serious injury and so they're coming to investigate, or there was an employee complaint. So now you're going to have to deal with them. And the one thing I will tell you is most EPA and most OSHA people, most people that work for these agencies, they don't like coming in and everybody immediately pulls attitude with them. Most of them are in it for the right reasons. And the vast majority that I've had to deal with are very fair. They're not out to get you. They're just out doing their job. So when you approach it like that with them and you figure out we're all in it for the same reason, we're all in it to protect the workforce, right? Keep that in mind as you're working with them. Now you may come at it from a different angle than they do, right? They're a regulatory agency from the government. So they're like, these are the rules, you's following them, right? And then you, on the other hand, you're coming at it, okay, now I'm going into protecting my company mode. And defending what we've done. And you're going to go into that. So there's a little, there's not 100% agreement with them. But if you establish that early on with them that, hey, we're trying to do the best thing here, most of them are incredibly fair and you can work with them. And sometime I'll walk you through in one of my upcoming videos about what to expect during a regulatory inspection. So that one's stressful because that will put anybody, I've been doing this 18, 19 years, probably had at least a dozen investigations or inspections, I should say. And every one of them, because it makes you question, it feels like every decision you've ever made is being questioned at that point in time. But at the end of the day, you're all in it for the same reason. Go through it. If you're prepared, if you do the right things leading up to that, you should be able to look them in the eye. There might be one or two little snafus along the way. It's usually paperwork or I didn't document this right, stuff like that. You can get through that pretty easily and they'll work through that with you. And then finally, one of the last qualities of a safety professional, I think you need to have some organizational skills because you're going to have a million things coming at you from a million directions from every person that you work with, for, you name it. And so you have to be organized because it can get away from you pretty quick. So it's nice if you have some kind of a safety management system, or even if it's as simple as you have the OSHA guide, you go through it and then you go section by section and you start making an audit list so you can start auditing your company and going out there, are we following all these rules, and then get it into the regular habit and then start training your workforce to do it. So if you're looking to get into safety, those are the things you're going to be addressing. And then also, if you're coming up from anybody that comes in new, just understand your first couple of years, they're going to test your mettle, they're going to try you, they're going to try to see what you got. And you got to be willing to do that. But once you've established yourself, and most people that I've worked with have been able to do it pretty quickly and gain a lot of trust of the workforce, now they'll trust you, and now you can start gaining headway. So anyway, I hope this maybe opened up some eyes, giving you a few things to think about. Anybody's thinking about getting into safety, have any specific questions, just go ahead and leave it in the comments here. I do look at my comments and I'll try to respond if I see anything. Reach out to me any way you can, okay? So for today, that was Papa Todd Takes. I'm Papa Todd. Stay safe out there. Bye now.